Hello and welcome to this special Center Stage India. Over the last couple of months, we've seen a focus on India like rarely before. The Prime Minister has led delegations outside, meeting investors and global leaders, and the Finance Minister has done the same in Southeast Asia. Why is all of this happening right now? Well, the reason is really because the world economies are slowing down. So is India in a good spot? Is there a lot of opportunity ahead? Well, to discuss this, joining me today are Sir Martin Sorrell, the chairman of WPP, and Dr. Rana Kapoor, the head of ASSOCHAM and also the founder and CMD of Yes Bank. We've had a massive outreach by the Indian government at a time when the global economy is going through a period of angst. China is, slowing down. But I'm going to ask you, what have you made? Because you met the Prime Minister in New York. Yeah. Did he mean business? Was there a buy-in? Because there have been a lot of concerns about doing business in India.
Well, I think there are concerns amongst foreign multinationals when they see the Vodafone tax case study, if I can call it that, or they see what happened with Nestle and Maggi. I mean, both those companies are major clients of ours. And also, for another example would be Nokia and the transfer of factories to Microsoft, are also both big clients of ours in southern India. So I think there are concerns, and I've heard Prime Minister and the new administration have set out in a relatively short period of time a very sophisticated, all-embracing, broad strategic plan. But it's like a few years ago there was a big debate about what's more important, strategy or execution. And I was always bemused by this debate because some would say strategy is important, you don't have to worry about execution. Others would say the vice versa, execution was more important, don't worry about the strategy. The honest answer is it's both. So the Prime Minister has exactly the same issue in my view, which is he has a very, very ambitious strategy. He's a tremendous communicator, orator, and of course, it's not just about oratory and appealing over the heads of Parliament to the electorate. It's also a question about doing a little bit of arm twisting. So you have the strategy, and then you have to implement, and you have to have the structure and the bench strength to get it done, and administration to get it done. So those sort of strategy, implementation, and structure are the key issues. So the real issue for the government, in my humble view, and I come here once a year, and therefore I'm the world's leading expert on India. But we're taking that with a truckload of salt, what I say. I think the real issue is about implementation here. But having said all that, India is the last man left standing. I mean, of the BRICS, or even if you called it the BRICS, and you include South Africa and Indonesia in Brazil, Russia, India, and China, India is the best one. I mean, I'd rank the BRIC. India, and then I would rank probably China, and then I would rank Brazil, and then at the bottom, Russia, because obviously we have some long-term issues there.
Rana, you were part of the entire meetings that the Prime Minister had before this leg, and I think that was a very candid, conversation that you had, where the government turned around and told the industry that, get back your animal spirits and start investing, and there were a lot of back and forth. So tell us, how are things looking? Because the sense that we get when we look at companies and balance sheets is that the problem is within. It's not really outside right now.
No, Minnie, I quite agree with you that the problem in India is a very much indigenous issue. I think in the Prime Minister's meeting on September 8th, very similar to the observations that Martin has just shared, is that, we have a great vision. The Prime Minister has a great strategy for the country, startup, stand-up, digital, skill. All of that is very, very relevant. The question is the methodology and the execution, because there is a rather protracted delay in terms of execution, steps by the government. So I think the points that really resonated, were to do with private investment, building or rebuilding its risk appetite to invest, in new investment formation, new capital formation in the country, because most private sector owners, promoters have been somewhat, I would say, looking at housekeeping, wearing seat belts, and are not necessarily at this stage very positive in terms of new investment. So the point was, how do you get the animal spirits going, and what are the lubricants required? So I think point number one is that the government itself, because it has substantial resources saved in public sector corporations, needs to catalyze those surpluses into new productive capital formation. Sure. The good news is, and I saw the data points recently, that the overall capital expenditure by the government is up by 18.6% compared to about 9.6% in the previous 2 years. New project clearances are up about 62% versus new referrals. So the speed of clearances is now exceeding the new referrals coming into the system by the project management group. To me, these are good developments. But what is missing, and I took the liberty of stating this in that very important meeting, I just felt that, to create wins in a new system, in a new ecosystem that is going through a renaissance, you need to create short-term wins like we do in large corporations.
Sure.
You need to create medium-term, ideas, and then work towards the long-term naturally. But the short-term wins, the short-term, principles, policies need to move faster to get the economic gears changing and moving into like top momentum.
But right now, there is...
Just on this animal spirits thing for a minute. I mean, I think there are more animal spirits in India than there are, or more Keynesian animal spirits here than there are outside India, particularly post-Lehman. And it is because we have a very conservative, if you're trying to run a company, at one end you have of the spectrum, you have the disruptors like an Uber or an Airbnb challenging, you started Yes Bank in 2003, and you built a competitor, and in a sense you were a disruptor. Well, now you've become a member of the establishment. We started disrupting, I guess, to some extent 30 years ago, but you have disruptors, right? Uber and Airbnb. At the other end you have the zero-based budgeters who are driving down cost in established companies, and in the middle you have the activist investors. You have Nelson Peltz taking 1% of GE, Nelson Peltz causing great changes in a company like DuPont. So in this situation post-Lehman, the animal spirits are dull. I mean, the capex and opex by major companies is under pressure. The problem is that companies are too short-term.
How long before corporate profitability comes back? And do you think this whole rate cut regime, this aggressiveness by the RBI is going to kind of egg on growth, or at least get growth back?
I think distinctly the growth drivers are substantially now in place. We've seen Modinomics translating into Modi momentum, and now you're seeing some of the headline issues which have plagued India's stress over the last couple of years, in a way de-risking the economy. First and foremost, if you look at the macro indicators, with a reduction of almost 125 basis points in our repo rate, with inflation targets being achieved ahead of the schedule, which was for January of 2016, seeing our overall current account deficit position being better than the target of 1.5%, right now at about 1%. Generally, currency stability, and the volatility risk in India has subdued to a very large extent. So I think from a monetary balance of payments, in excess of $350 billion. So judgmentally, I think the macro is very, very favorable for India, and we have good tailwinds, from a macro standpoint.
So the macros are looking good, the problem in the micros?
I think the issue is that, yes, the government has unleashed, I would like to believe, micro, macro, institutional, and administrative reforms. The point is that we are still in first gear as far as reforms are
and also,
concerned.
looking at it from a geographic point of view or global point of view, the outside factors are not in India's favor.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have this debate as to whether China's slowdown is good for India or bad for India. The honest answer is, be careful what we wish for.
But I think the view is that because of the Chinese slowdown, that a lot of the investment will come India's way, and with the push that the government is doing and this period of a little bit of pain out there, you will get more investment money. Do you think that's going to happen?
The world is not disconnected, right? Yeah. It's true that if you look at the BRICS and Next 11, and India is the fastest growing BRIC, we will direct more of our investment to India, and our clients will do the same. The foreign multinationals and the Asian power brands or the Indian power brands will be more potent because the Indian. But you have to look at it in the context of the worldwide growth.
So when you talk about India and
Yes.
your outlook on India, what are you picking up from your clients? How big is WPP looking at the India opportunity right now?
I mean, India it's not as big as China. It's the same number of people, interestingly, about 15,000, 16,000 people as China, but China is 1.6 billion, 1.65 billion, and India is, as I say, would just be under 600 million this year. We have a very big market share. What does that tell you? It tells you that India is under-branded and under-advertised. The advertising and branding and marketing as a proportion of GDP is too low, and it will grow faster.
One of the most exciting pieces that is happening in India is this whole surge of entrepreneurship, which is going bottom up.
Yes.
In fact, technology is driving a lot of that. How do you see it disrupting areas like banking? Because you've got payment banks, you've got wallets happening, and you've got a whole bunch of e-commerce-led companies coming up. How are you seeing it as an opportunity?
I think, Minnie, when at the turn of the century, India's clarion call was the knowledge economy of the world. I think what has changed in the last 12 months or so is that from the knowledge economy, India is now transitioning into the entrepreneurial economy. And in my opinion, the entrepreneurial economy is being driven by a term that I've recently coined called DICE, design, innovation, creativity, led by entrepreneurship. So to me, this is a sweet spot, a tipping point in the economy. And therefore, I like to believe next 5 to 10 years, don't be surprised if there are 75 to 100 new billionaires coming from the new economy finally.
The story around India right now seems to be the great opportunity for the next 300 million, because technology and e-commerce has now gone outside the group that traditional businesses have targeted, and it's made it far more democratic. From WPP's standpoint, how are you seeing the opportunity there? How are you servicing your clients at that stage? And how is this whole digital mix turning out to be?
Well, we've always been blessed by having brands. I mean, WPP is only 30 years old, but J. Walter Thompson and Ogilvy and Mather have been in India for 60 or 70 years, whatever it is. So we've all been blessed by what happened in history. And we've always looked at India as, I mean, one of the things that we discussed with Prime Minister Modi, or one of the points that certainly I made, was that India is not one country. It is a series of states, just like China. China is slightly larger number. So some of the stuff that we're doing in India is around penetrating the whole of India, not just tier 1 cities, but tier 2, 3, and 4 cities throughout the country. So you have to look at it holistically.
It's often been said, Rana, that India does best when the government is not watching. And right now, I think the whole spurt of entrepreneurship has come in areas where it's really a consumer-facing, new technology and young, entrepreneur-led piece. How do you see this evolving? Because you were part of the entrepreneurial rush post-liberalization, and you saw a different set of influences when you turned entrepreneur. How are you seeing it now?
No, Minnie, actually, I see, this as a fantastic, resurgence in our economy. It happened for a very short period, what was the golden era of the Indian economy between 2003 till about 2008, so give or take 4 to 5 years. And then we had speed breakers for the last 6, 7 years. Now what I see is that, yes, there is government enablement which is happening. We have a chief evangelist in our Prime Minister. He's a chief mentor in the system. He's creating motivational forces. He's building national esteem. He's building national confidence. He's creating more conviction through very effective communication. To me, this is a very, very major role to boost the morale of people. Next step is the government still has a role to play, because the government, if it has to create catapults in the system, to create accelerators in the system, it has to create new frameworks for innovation, for incubation. I call it the principle of 5 as in funding, incubation, vesting, and entrepreneurship. So when you look at these factors, you need favorable taxes. You need, quite like what we saw in the SEZs and the export units, they got dispensation. Today we need innovation districts.
cut of companies which are prominent brands in India are very traditional companies, banks, FMCG companies, etc. Globally, is a technology companies. Do you see a tectonic shift happening there?
Well, it's not
India
fair, actually.
well?
I mean, you see it in automotive
you do,
as well.
you do, but the Apples and the IBMs, etc., are the biggest players there. But I'm going to ask you, with this new wave of entrepreneurs, are you likely to see a change over there? And do you see your top clients getting a little worried about disruptors coming and changing the game?
What's really interesting, so we do a lot of work on what we call the power brands, and in this case, Asian power brands. And, Yes Bank would be a very good example. These are companies that are created, in the last 12 or so years, using the expertise from Bank of America and the Eagle pins. There you are, you capture that, you train them, right? And then they go off and they start these new businesses to compete against you. The biggest thing is that when we go and talk to our clients at their headquarters, they see their competitors as being other multinationals. And those are not the competitors. The true competitors to the multinationals are the local companies and the regional companies, the multinationals of the future. And we call them, in the context of Asia, the Asian power brands. And what's really interesting, Millward Brown has done this extensive analysis, and we're going to publicize this shortly. So we do the branding analysis. So we do the top 50, 100 brands worldwide, or in India or Latin America or Indonesia, as we've done recently, or China, whatever it happens to be. But what's really interesting is the growth of the local power brands. And those are the ones that have the disproportionate share of growth and the disproportionate share of competitive activity, and who our clients should be focused on.
In banking, how do you see the landscape change, and how is Yes Bank keeping pace with this changing landscape?
You see, Mini, I quite agree with what Martin said, that in India, there is a dearth of, let's say, even local brands, and we are far short of global brands, and we practically have no global brands. Other than Tetley, which we acquired, Tata's acquired in 2000, we really don't have a brand that resonates, and building brands requires ingredients, and no better expert than Martin himself. It requires traceability, it needs a trust mark, and more often than not, it needs a appellation, sometimes geographic appellation. Banking, to me, also needs to create pulling forces, right? So a bank like ours, Yes Bank, and we have started working with WPP and just launched a program called India Bole Yes. So you'll see it on the bus stops driving in to the St. Regis. But the real thing is how to capture digital banking today, and we have designed a program called ART. ART is about alliances, it's about relationships, and the T is naturally for technology. So to me, it's not just trying to do everything yourself, because there are ecosystems out there, for example, with telecom companies who have deep penetration. So how do you partner with them to build the alliances? Sure. It's about how to improve customer service through relationships, through cash management tactics, to making sure that there is more efficient transactional payments, at same-day credits, for instance. And technology through frugal measures, because India has the advantage where we can build the lowest cost technologies. So when you dovetail all that and you start offering this as a differentiator, to me is the future of our bank. And we want to be the Apple of Indian banking, and we have all the genetics in place to achieve that now.
Since we are calling this show Center Stage India, I've got two questions as closing questions for you. Rana, starting off with you. All this great stuff aside, the fact is the nitty-gritty of governance is tough. You've got the Bihar elections coming. You've got the land acquisition bill stuck. You've got GST still to see the light of day. What are the 2-3 structural things that the government, or the policy decisions that the government can take to really get the next leg of growth going, or the next leg of sentiment boost?
In my judgment, naturally, there are political priorities, but the economic pendulum has started moving, practically from one extreme and steadily changing degrees, right? Now, with the macro and the fiscal, and the government coming to a good grip on what was a fairly uncontrollable inheritance, I personally believe that the pace of reforms needs to accelerate. And I would like to believe that's number one, starting with foreign direct investment. We've got too many, right now, speed breakers in the system. So we need to simplify FDI. I think what we really need to do next is to start looking at how to create short-term impulses in the economy so that the investment cycle is restored by the private sector. And that means also reducing the overall stress. To reduce the overall stress, you need to get the public sector banks conditioned well, and the government is seized with that challenge right now. And also to get the backlog of stress projects out of the way so that at least the overall debt position in the economy is harnessed. To me, that's the second most important issue. And I think the third most important issue is to really create innovation and entrepreneurial networks in the country in a way enabled by the government through tax breaks, through innovation districts, and with laser focused efforts there can make a significant difference.
What would you like to see in India when you do come and visit India and when you look at India as a business? And the second is what can be done to augment brand India?
I think what's really interesting about India is that one could argue the honeymoon's over. I mean, the Prime Minister's popularity rating, amazingly, has remained in the high 70s, which is where it was when he won the election and won the majority. And what's really interesting is it's remained so. So now is the big opportunity. No alternative. The Congress Party in a bit of disarray, just like the Labour Party in the UK after an electoral defeat. That may change over time, but no visible alternative. Now's the time to move the momentum. You use the Modonomics and Modi momentum, and which good phrases. Now on the branding side, the tracking that we do on India shows positive return. In other words, we track about 50 or 60 countries, and India does well. I mean, India's image is strong, driven by the Prime Minister and his very acute communication strategy, and driven by Make in India, by Digital India, by Startup India, and all the other campaigns. Danger that it might become too fragmented, my view would be, is to integrate it further, not to have too many concepts, but bring it together. Because, Incredible India, Make in India, great campaigns, some of which we participated in and some of which we're not. But really good campaigns. I mean, if we participated in all of them, they'd be all excellent. India
bole, yes, covers everything.
Between the two of you,
it's not that. Integrating it into one, I think, is very important. To be fair to the government, they do have a broad agenda. It is, as you said, trying to get the momentum going and trying to implement faster. So all this is about execution. It's not about strategy.
And I think that brings us to a fair conclusion of this conversation, that to get center stage, it has to be about focus, it has to be about execution, it has to be about really getting things moving.
This is just like a CEO who takes over a company that has been, doing well maybe or in difficulty, puts out a program, sets out a vision, sets out a strategy, and the other half of it, and it is half, is implementation.
And the government can turn to these two gentlemen for that, right?
Two phrases for this, opportunity and adversity, which means carpe diem, seize the opportunity. So I would like to believe that in a way summarizes. And the other one that I find a lot of resonance for our bank and for my national role in ASSOCHAM is be bold, go for gold.
On that note, on those
I would just add one thing, don't blow it.
That's an important one, not to miss. Well, gentlemen, really enjoyed having you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.